Greetings to everyone. And I'm very happy to be invited here today by Sakya Friends to speak on Chandra Gomin's 20 verses on the Bodhisattva Vows. And to give a little brief introduction on the author, first of all. Chandra Gomin lived around in the 7th century, and he lived at the same time as the great Indian master Chandrakirti of Nalanda University in India. So Chandra Gomin was a great scholar. He had mastered the fields of grammar, sutra, and tantra, and he was also a layperson. And he was guided throughout his life by Arya Avalokiteshvara, his tutelary deity. And he was a great scholar. He was invited to Nalanda University to teach the Dharma by Chandrakirti. And it is also said that he and Chandrakirti went into debate, which lasted for 7 long years. And during that time, Chandrakirti held on to the middle way view, while Chandra Gomin held on to the mind-only view, and they went into debate. And neither of them are said to have won, because Chandrakirti was being guided by Manjushri, while Chandra Gomin was being guided by Arya Avalokiteshvara. So there was no final outcome or victory for either sides due to that. But anyways, he was a great master, and there's also a story of how he was guided by Aryatara. And also it goes something as there was once a mother who had a very beautiful daughter, but the mother was very poor. So she could not, based on her poor situation, she could not easily wed her daughter. So therefore, she had to beg for provisions for wealth in order to provide for her daughter's marriage. And she heard that, the mother heard that Chandrakirti, who was living in Nalanda, was very wealthy, so she went to him. But because he was a monk, and also because of whatever wealth he had, he needed to offer or spend it for the Sangha members, he said he could not help, but he instead pointed or directed her to Chandra Gomin's home and told her to go to him and ask for help from him, and maybe he could help her. So she went to Chandra Gomin, and she requested for wealth. And Chandra Gomin himself, although he was a lay person, actually did not happen to possess a great wealth either. So what he really had was the Prajnaparamita Sutra with him, and also he had his robes that he wears. That's all sort of what he had. So he then went in one of his rooms in his house, where there was a painting of Aryatara, and Chandra Gomin requested Aryatara. When he requested Aryatara, he cried because he had so much compassion for helping the daughter and the mother. So he cried and told Aryatara of their poor situation and asked if she could help them. And Aryatara immediately, the painting of Aryatara immediately transformed into a real Aryatara. And that real Aryatara took off all of her jewelry or all of her garments and gave it to Chandra Gomin. And in that way, Chandra Gomin passed on Tara's jewelry to the mother so that she could provide for the daughter's wedding. And in that way, the painting, which earlier had Tara wearing lots of jewelry, later became a painting with Tara with no jewelry, just Tara wearing no jewelry. So there are such stories about Chandra Gomin. And according to the great master, the great Tibetan master Taranatha, in his history of Indian Buddhism, Chandra Gomin never really died. He never really left his mortal body, but he rather left, or he traveled to Mount Potala, the paradise of Avalokiteshvara, which is somewhere to the south of India. And he just traveled there and still lives there to this day in his mortal body without leaving it behind. So he still continues to live to this day. So he is a very special being. And his main practice, he himself followed the mind-only school of Buddhism. It is the philosophical school where the proponents or the followers believe that nothing truly exists except for mind. Only mind itself exists alone and nothing else exists. Whatever we perceive are all a sort of like a reflection of the mind, or they are all the nature of one's own mind. They are the creation, all appearances are the creation of one's mind, and only mind itself truly exists. So that is the sort of philosophical view which he followed. And the text which he wrote, he was actually, as I mentioned, a great scholar. It is said that he wrote around 432 different works. Some were on grammar, some were on sutra, some were on tantra, and so on. So 432 total works that he wrote. He was a great author. And this is one of the works, and one of the most famous works that he wrote. And it speaks about the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. When we speak about the Bodhisattva vows, there are two traditions. There is the Bodhisattva vows according to the middle way school, and there are the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. And both of these traditions, the lineage of both of these vows of these two different traditions differ. It starts with Buddha Shakyamuni, but for the mind-only school, it starts with Buddha Shakyamuni, then passed down to Arya Manjushri, and then to Arya Nagarjuna, and Chandrakirti, Shantideva, and great masters and so on, and continuing down to Sakyas. And it still continues now to the present day to His Holiness the 41st Sakya Rinpoche. And as for the Bodhisattva, the lineage of the Bodhisattva vow according to the mind-only school, it starts with Buddha Shakyamuni, then passed down to Maitreya, then gradually to, then it continues to Arya Asanga, and such masters as Chandra Gomin, and then it continues to the Kadambas in Tibet, and also the Sakyas, and even it continues to His Holiness the 41st Sakya Rinpoche as well. So both of these lineages His Holiness possesses. So if you wish to receive any of these Bodhisattva vows according to any of these traditions, we can simply request His Holiness. And but not just is the lineage itself different, but also the number of vows are different. And the Bodhisattva vows, according to the middle way school, can be given to great crowds, to a great number of beings, while the Bodhisattva vows, according to the mind-only school, can only be given to inspect them before we give the vows upon them. You need to inspect the disciples, see if they have received the pratimoksha vows prior. If they have, then they can, and if they have received the pratimoksha vows prior, and have also accumulated a great deal of good merit, then they can receive the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. However, for the middle way school, you do not need to necessarily have received the pratimoksha vows prior. You can go straight to receiving the Bodhisattva vows. It can be given to a great crowd and so on, and it's much easier to guard. So there are differences. And so anyways, today's text, the title in Sanskrit is Bodhisattva Samvara Vimsaka. And the title in Tibetan is Changju Sembe Lomba Nishupa. The title in English would be 20 Verses on the Bodhisattva Vows. So here Chandra Gomin speaks about the Bodhisattva vows, the main root downfalls, and also the minor 46 transgressions that harm the Bodhisattva vows. So if we learn about this text, then we will easily know easily know how to guard the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only tradition once we receive it. So there's great benefit in studying this work. So first, we start with the homage. Homage to youthful Manjushri. So this is the homage from Chandra Gomin to his tutelary deity, who is the youthful Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And the purpose of paying homage to Manjushri, or the tutelary deity, first of all, is to accumulate great merit, and also to clear any obstacles in the work of writing this scripture. So with that, we have spoken of the homage. And then following that, we have the first verse, which reads, "To the Buddhas, together with their children, respectfully pay homage and offer whatever you can. In all directions and times abide the Bodhisattvas, whose vows should be taken up." So to explain this, first to explain the first two lines of the first verse. It means, to the Buddhas of the three times, together with their Bodhisattva children, oneself must respectfully pay homage, or you could say show great respect with one's body, speech, and mind. And not just should we offer prostrations or homage with one's body, speech, and mind, but we should also make offerings to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and three times. And the offerings that we make to them should be offerings that are both real and imagined offerings. So these are the offerings that we should make, both real and imagined. Imagined means visualized offerings. In real offerings are such as offering the flower, personally offering flowers and beautiful ornaments and so on. And to explain the last two, the third and the fourth lines of the first verse, the last two lines, it means the Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and three times have three moral conducts or discipline in their mind. And the three moral discipline in their mind are, the first is the moral discipline of abandoning non-virtuous deeds. The second is the moral discipline of gathering virtuous deeds, or accumulating virtuous deeds, you could say. And the last is the moral discipline of benefiting other sentient beings. So these are the three moral disciplines which the Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions have in their mind. And before one wishes to practice these three moral disciplines, before oneself wishes to practice such three disciplines and guard such three disciplines which the Bodhisattvas possess, first of all, oneself must receive the Bodhisattva vows. After one receives the Bodhisattva vows, then finally we can guard and keep and practice these three moral disciplines. So if we want to practice these three moral disciplines, we first need to receive the Bodhisattva vows, according to the mind-only tradition. Now to read the second verse. These vows, which are the treasure of all merit, should be taken up with a supreme motivation from a guru who abides by his vows, is learned, and is capable. So to explain the first two lines of this second verse, it means the reason of receiving the Bodhisattva vows, or the purpose of receiving the Bodhisattva vows, is for oneself and others to achieve happiness in this and also future lives. The purpose of receiving the Bodhisattva vows is for oneself and others to temporarily attain good rebirth from lifetime to lifetime, and to ultimately attain liberation. The Bodhisattva vows, which is like a precious, inexhaustible treasure, which fulfills all of one's heart's wishes, must be received with the mind of enlightenment, which wishes for the enlightenment of oneself and others as the motivation. So basically, when we receive, we just talked about this, I just spoke about the purpose of receiving the Bodhisattva vows. So how do we receive it? It's so important to receive it because it helps oneself and others in future lives, not just this, but also future lives, temporarily to attain good rebirths, ultimately to attain liberation. So if it's this important, I need to receive it. But how do I receive it? What kind of motivation should I have when I receive it? So this is the answer. When one receives the Bodhisattva vows, one should receive it with the motivation that one is receiving this vows so that oneself can attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And that is the motivation that one must have. And to explain the last two lines of the second verse, the vows itself should be received from a teacher who is endowed with the Bodhisattva vows of the mind-only school. A teacher who is learned in the Mahayana scriptures, and a teacher who is capable of bestowing it. So we just mentioned earlier with the earlier two lines, what is the purpose of receiving the vows and what is the motivation we must have while receiving the vows. So now with the last two lines, what Chandra Gomin is saying is that he's introducing or telling us or letting us know what kind of teacher we should receive the vows from. And the teacher should be someone who they themselves are endowed with the Bodhisattva vows. And that is the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only tradition. And not just should they be endowed, not just should the teacher who bestows the vows be endowed with the vows themselves, but they should also be learned in the Mahayana scriptures. That is also a quality that they should have. And not just should they be learned in the Mahayana scriptures, but they should also be capable of giving down or passing down the vows to others. So this is what the last two lines of the second verse mean. Now to read the third verse. Then, as for the person taking the vows, since these vows are the highest of virtues, the Buddhas, together with their children, will always, with delighted hearts, consider one as their beloved child. So to explain this whole verse, this third verse altogether, what it means is that once the vows have been bestowed by the teacher to the disciple, in order to make the student joyful, in order to inspire the student, the teacher must tell the student, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas residing in the 10 directions know of your taking on the vows. They know that you took on the vows. And so therefore you should be joyful. You should be happy. They will also look upon you. All the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, not only do they know that you took on the vows, but they will also look upon you as their good child. And they will look upon you similar to a relative. And they will always take care of you out of their great compassion. So this is what Chandra Gomin is saying. The teacher must inspire the student and make the student joyful after they have received the vows by telling them such things, as it is true. Now to read the fourth verse. Whether for oneself whether for others or for oneself, do what in a greater scope brings benefit, even if it causes suffering now, and do what brings benefit and happiness at all times, but refrain from temporary pleasure that has no benefit ultimately. So to first speak about the first two lines, whether for others or for oneself, do what in a greater scope brings benefit, even if it causes suffering now. To explain that, what it means is, if by working on something in this life, it does not bring comfort or happiness, yet it brings comfort and happiness to oneself and others in future lives, by working on it now, it must be accomplished now. So what this means is basically, we may work on something right now, we may be working on anything, any kind of job or any kind of work that we are doing, whatever we are doing right now, especially in this lifetime, if it does not bring comfort or happiness right now while we are working, but if we work right now and the end result of the work is that it will bring comfort and happiness in the future, then Chandra Gomin is saying that it is worth working on that right now, and we should accomplish it. Even if it's not pleasant, even if it's not easy to do it now, we should understand, we should, do it because it is beneficial for oneself and others in the future. So that is what he is saying. It also means if a bodhisattva performs a work which brings comfort in future lives and happiness in this life as well, then that work, which is the cause for both comfort and happiness, must be accomplished now. So earlier we mentioned that if the work is difficult to do now, but it brings benefit in the future, then it's worth doing. Right now, we are saying not just that, but if the work not only brings benefit, comfort, and happiness in the future, but also it is there's comfort and happiness in this lifetime right now as we are working. If there's both comfort and happiness right now and also in the future, and we should also do, or you could say, we should also accomplish such work. Now, to explain the last line, I believe, but refrain from temporary pleasure that has no benefit ultimately. To explain that, it means if while working in this life, one faces difficulties, if it helps ultimately, one should accomplish it. So just like taking sour medicine, even when one suffers from a fever. So sorry. This is the explanation. To continue with the explanation with the first three lines. So this will continue with the fourth line a little later. Maybe it's good to put an example for the earlier mentioned three lines. So as we mentioned, while we work in this life, if there are difficulties, if there's no comfort or happiness as we work, but ultimately it helps, then as Chandra Gomin said, we should accomplish it. So to put an example, it is like taking sour tasting medicine, even while one has a fever. So when one has a fever, one will take one might happen to have to take sour tasting medicine in order to be cured from the fever. And it's not pleasant to take sour tasting medicine. It's not delicious, but we will still take it because in the end, we know that by taking the medicine, we will be cured. So likewise, when we work right now and it's difficult, if we know that it will help ultimately, we should still, not be pushed down by any difficulties that we face right now, but continue to work hard as we will enjoy the end result in the future. So that is the example. Finally, for the last line, but refrain from temporary pleasure that has no benefit ultimately. So what Chandra Gomin is saying is that while working in this life, if the work is too easy right now as we work, but it does not help ultimately in the end, especially in future lives, then it should not be accomplished. Just because it is easy right now to work on it, it doesn't mean it needs to be accomplished if it doesn't bring benefit in the end, especially in future lifetimes. So the example is like how we should not take a delicious poisonous food. Just, a person might take a delicious poisonous food, not knowing, and they might enjoy at the moment they eat because it is delicious, but in the end, because it is poisonous, they will suffer from stomach ache and even from food poisoning, and could lead to eventual death. So likewise, just as we should not take delicious poisonous food just because it is delicious, we should not work on things that are too easy just because it is easy, especially if it does not bring any benefit in the end. So that is what this fourth verse means. Now to read the fifth verse. There are 4 root downfalls which arise from strong afflictions and cause destruction of the vows. The Buddha considers them similar to a loss of the vows and include. So what this means is that, to explain this 5th verse together, all of the lines together, Chandra Gomin is saying that the faults which completely destroy the Bodhisattva vows are 4. There are 4 faults which completely destroy a Bodhisattva's vows. And these 4 faults are fueled by strong defilements, such as ignorance, attachment, and hatred. So when we have such defilements, such strong defilements, these strong defilements fuel the 4 faults. And these 4 faults will then lead, to one's own Bodhisattva vows to be completely become destroyed. So Chandra Gomin is saying that there are 4 faults which destroy a Bodhisattva's vows. And these 4 are similar to the 4 defeating factors which destroy a fully ordained monk or nun's vows, as mentioned in the Vinaya. So in the Vinaya, it is mentioned it mentions 4 defeating factors, which if the monk or nun has, then it completely destroys their ordination vows. So similarly, just like they have 4 defeating factors to their vows, to the ordination vows, the Bodhisattva has 4 faults which can completely destroy their Bodhisattva vows. And so that is what Chandra Gomin is saying. Now to read the 6th verse. Out of desire for gain and respect, praising oneself and criticizing others, out of stinginess, not giving dharma and wealth, to the suffering beings lacking protection. So this 6th verse mentions of the first 2 faults which completely destroy Bodhisattva's vows. While the next verse, which is the 7th verse, mentions of the 3rd and the 4th faults which completely destroy a Bodhisattva's vows. So right now the 6th verse mentions the first 2 faults which completely destroy a Bodhisattva's vows. So to explain this, so this verse, the 6th verse itself has 4 lines. So the first 2 lines explain the first mention of the first verse, and the first 2 lines mention of the first fault which completely destroys the Bodhisattva's vows, and the second and third, the third and the fourth lines mention the second fault which completely destroys the Bodhisattva vows. So to speak of the first 2, the first and the second lines of the 6th verse. It means that if one is too attached to wealth, to money, to wealth, to possessions, and if one is too attached to respect and status in society, and if one praises oneself due to being too attached to wealth, respect, and status, and if one criticizes others, if one criticizes others who have actually earned wealth and are well respected in society due to being too attached to wealth and respect and status, then this is the first downfall of a bodhisattva. This completely destroys the Bodhisattva vows. So if you do not understand that, to mention it again, due to being too attached to wealth, respect, and status, if one praises oneself and criticizes others who have wealth and are well respected in society, then by doing that, one's bodhisattva vows become completely destroyed. And this is the first fault which completely destroys the bodhisattva vows. To speak of the 3rd and the 4th line of the 6th verse, it means that for those sentient beings who are greatly suffering right now due to illness, and those sentient beings who are tired, who are exhausted, and who have no protector to help them, no savior or no guide or no protector to help them, if one as a bodhisattva, if oneself as a bodhisattva does not help them, does not try to help them in such dire need, in such when they're facing such unfortunate situation like that, if one does not try to help them by giving them the Dharma teachings, and if one does not try to give them by providing them wealth, due to possessing strong stinginess, if one does not try to help them by giving them wealth because one is too stingy to give one's wealth to them, if one does not wish to help them by giving them the Dharma teachings because one is too stingy to one's knowledge of the Dharma and so on, then this is the second fault which completely destroys a bodhisattva's vow, the bodhisattva's vows. So therefore, if we see sentient beings who are ill, who are suffering, who have no protector, and who are exhausted, we should give the Dharma, we should give wealth to them and help them. But if we do not give them wealth and Dharma out of stinginess, due to our great stinginess, then that is the second fault, and our bodhisattva vows become completely destroyed. Now to read the 7th verse. Not paying attention to others' confessions and beating them out of aggression, abandoning the Mahayana and teaching a mere imitation of the sacred Dharma. So as I mentioned earlier, this 7th verse mentions of the 3rd and the 4th fault, which will completely destroy a bodhisattva's vows. The first 2 lines of this verse mentions of the 3rd fault. The last 2 lines mentions of the 4th fault. So to explain the first 2 lines, it means that if someone, for example, one's own attendant or one's own assistant, makes a mistake and then later comes into the presence of oneself, who is the bodhisattva, and they confess their wrongdoing, they confess their mistakes to oneself. Even if they make the mistake and they confess their faults to oneself, if oneself, the bodhisattva, still does not take heed of their confession and does not forgive them, instead of forgiving them, if one beats them with whips and so on, and if one ties them up and tortures them and punishes them and harms them, then, and one does so out of great anger, if one does all of that out of great rage or great anger, then by doing that, one commits the 3rd fault, which will completely destroy a bodhisattva's vows. To explain the last two lines of the 7th verse, it means, if the Bodhisattva, who is oneself, does not accept the Mahayana scriptures as authentic teachings of the Buddha and abandons them because one does not believe them as authentic teachings of the Buddha, and also if oneself as the Bodhisattva teaches fake or false dharma to other sentient beings due to one's strong liking of false or fake dharma, then that is the fourth fault, which will completely destroy the Bodhisattva's vows. So therefore, as a Bodhisattva, we must teach we must first of all accept the Mahayana scriptures, or you could say the scriptures of the great vehicle, as authentic Buddhist scriptures taught by the Buddha, and one must never abandon them. And one must also never teach false dharma to sentient beings and fool them. We must always teach the authentic Buddha dharma to sentient beings. So that is what it is saying. If we fail to do so, then we commit the fourth fault, and Bodhisattva vows are completely destroyed. So with this, we have with the 6th and the 7th verse, we have now just spoken of the 4 sort of main downfalls, so the 4 main faults which completely destroy a Bodhisattva's vows. So once we receive the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school, we must make 100% sure that we never have any of these 4 faults, because if we do, then our Bodhisattva vows are completely become ruined and destroyed. So now we come to the 8th verse. It reads, if these transgressions happen, the vows should be taken again. The middling afflictions should be confessed to 3 persons. The remaining afflictions to 1. The one should determine in one's own mind whether they are afflictions or not. The branch downfalls include. So what this 8th verse is saying is that just in case any of the four or all 4 of the earlier mentioned 4 faults occur in one's mind, if that happens, then our Bodhisattva vows become destroyed. So if it becomes destroyed, then what is there to do? Is there no hope? Is it over? Is it completely over? One may wonder, but Chandra Gomin is saying that no, you can receive the vows again. It's not completely over. You can receive it again. And there are things that you need to do. You need to confess your faults. So first of all, to explain the first line of this 8th verse, if the transgressions happen, the vows should be taken again. So what this means is that if the earlier mentioned 4 transgressions occur due to very strong defilements, any of those 4 transgressions can occur possibly due to strong attachment, due to strong anger, or due to strong ignorance. As we mentioned earlier, these 4 faults are fueled by the strong defilements. So therefore, if we have strong defilements, there's a great danger that any of these 4, or possibly all 4 of these faults, will be committed. So if we do commit any of these 4 faults due to our strong defilements, the Bodhisattva vows have become destroyed. So we need to retake the vows again from the master. So we need to go into the presence of the master, a teacher. And we already mentioned how the teacher should be, the qualities or the characteristics of a teacher. As we mentioned earlier, the teacher needs to have been endowed with the vows themselves, needs to be be learned in the Mahayana scriptures, and needs to be able or capable of bestowing or passing down the vows to the disciples. So those are the qualities of the teacher. So we need to go into the presence of such a teacher, and we must retake the vows Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. So that is what the first line of the 8th verse is saying. The second line, which reads, the middling afflictions should be confessed to 3 persons. What that means is that if the 4 transgressions occur due to medium defilements, so what that means is that it occurs due to medium defilements such as medium anger, medium hatred, medium ignorance, which means that it's not, for example, if we just stick with attachment, we might have attachment that is not too strong, not too strong nor too weak. It's sort of like a medium leveled attachment, and due to that we might commit any of the faults, the 4 faults. And likewise, medium anger and medium ignorance might lead to committing any of the 4 faults. So if we commit any of the 4 faults due to having medium defilements, then we still need to confess our faults. And the way we need to confess it to the teacher, the way we need to confess it is that we can confess it in the presence of 3 people. And the 3 people that we confess it to can be any number of people, as long as they are 3. Any people, as long as they are there are 3 people, and these 3 people need to have been endowed with the Bodhisattva vows of the mind-only school themselves. So in the presence of such 3 people who are endowed with the Bodhisattva vows of the mind-only school, one must confess one's negative faults, the transgressions that we have that have been fueled by the medium defilements. So to explain the third line, the remaining afflictions to 1, what that means is that if the transgressions occur due to minor defilements, due to very weak defilements such as anger, due to weak attachment, weak ignorance, then we do not need to necessarily go into the presence of 3 people to confess. We can simply confess it in the presence of 1 person who is endowed with the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. So this is what it is saying. And the 4th line reads, one should determine in one's own mind whether they are afflictions or not. So what that means is that if, just in case there are no such people or person available to confess to, if there's nobody around who you can confess to, if that is the situation, then you can still confess to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and especially one may confess with one's own mind as the witness. So it does not necessarily need to have anybody, if there are nobody there to confess your faults to. So this is what it means. Now to speak of the branch downfalls. So we completed by this, so far we've been speaking about the 4 root downfalls of the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. So with these root downfalls, the Bodhisattva vows are completely destroyed. And so you need to retake it again. And for that, as we mentioned, you can, if it's due to strong defilements, you need to retake it from the master himself or herself. If it was caused due to medium defilements, you need to confess and retake it from 3 people. If it was caused due to minor defilements, then 1 person, and so on. But the branch downfalls are faults, but they are minor faults compared to the 4 root downfalls. So it means that if you commit any of the 46, there are 46 in total, 46 transgressions or branch downfalls of the Bodhisattva vows according to the mind-only school. So if you commit any one of these 46 branch downfalls, it does not completely destroy the Bodhisattva vows, but it weakens it. It makes the Bodhisattva vows of poor quality. The Bodhisattva vows that we have in our mind becomes of a poor quality, and it weakens it, but it does not completely become destroyed. So we come to the 9th verse now. Not offering one's 3 doors to the 3 jewels, following a desirous mind, not paying respect to seniors, not replying to questions. So with this 9th verse, Chandra Gomin speaks of the first 4 of the 46 branch downfalls of a bodhisattva. So each line speaks of each minor transgression. So the first line, not offering one's 3 doors to the 3 jewels, speaks of the first minor transgression of the 46 transgressions. It means that if oneself, the bodhisattva, does not make offerings to the 3 jewels, if oneself, the bodhisattva, does not praise the 3 jewels, if oneself, the bodhisattva, does not offer prostrations to the 3 jewels through one's body, speech, and mind. So if oneself as the bodhisattva does not make offerings to the 3 jewels through one's body, speech, and mind, if oneself does not praise the Buddha, if oneself does not praise the 3 jewels through one's body, speech, and mind, if oneself does not offer prostrations to the 3 jewels through one's body, speech, and mind, who are the objects of offerings and who are the objects of refuge, who are worthy of taking refuge, if one does not do so, then that is the first transgression, and it weakens our bodhisattva vows. So therefore, as a bodhisattva, we need to always, or if not always, try to make offerings, try to sing praises, try to offer prostrations to the 3 jewels through our body, speech, and mind as much as possible. If we fail to do so, we commit one of the minor faults of the bodhisattva vow. To explain the second line of the 9th verse, which reads as following a desireless mind, it means that if one does not become content with one's own wealth and the possessions which one possesses, that is the second fault. So therefore, as a bodhisattva, we need to always be content with what we have. We should not be too greedy. If we have a certain amount of wealth and certain amount of possessions, we must be content with what we have. If we fail to be content with what we have, we commit the second downfall of the 46 transgressions of a bodhisattva. To explain the third line, which is not paying respect to seniors, it means that if we fail to show respect to the elders, that is the third fault of the bodhisattva. So there are 3 types of elders. Elder itself can be categorized into 3 different types of elders. The first type of elder is those who are elder than oneself in age, those who are older than oneself. That is the first type of elder. The second type of elder is those who are elder in qualities. So basically it means those who have better qualities compared to oneself. So that is the second type of elder, those elder in qualities. The third elder is those elder in practice. So those who are more experienced in practice compared to oneself. That is the third elder. So if oneself, the bodhisattva, fails to show respect to these 3 elders, then that is the third fault, and it weakens the bodhisattva vows. To explain the 4th line, which reads as not replying to questions, it means that if somebody asks the bodhisattva, who is oneself, if somebody asks you dharma questions related to the dharma, and you do not answer them, even though you know how to answer them, even though you know the answer to the questions, if you still do not answer them, then by not answering them, even though you know the answer, you are committing the 4th fault. So therefore, as a bodhisattva, if you get asked questions by others, especially the questions related to the dharma, you must not fail to answer them. As long as you know the answer, if you know it, you must answer it. If you don't know the answer, then of course that is fine. But if you know the answer but do not answer them still, then that is the 4th fault. We now come to the 10th verse. Not accepting invitations, not accepting gifts such as gold, not giving dharma teachings to those who desire them, disdaining those who have a distorted discipline. So this is speaks of the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth minor transgressions of a bodhisattva. So the first line of the 10th verse, not accepting invitations, speaks of the fifth minor fault. So it means that if someone invites you, the bodhisattva, and you do not accept their invitation, for example, if somebody invites you to their home, or if somebody invites you to a place, and you do not accept their invitation out of great pride, because you are very proud, if you're too proud, or you do not accept their invitation due to great anger towards them, then that is the fifth fault. So therefore, it means that when the bodhisattva is invited to some place, the bodhisattva should accept the invitation. And they should not, if they fail to accept the invitation due to great anger and due to great pride, if they do not accept the invitation due to that, then they are committing the fifth fault. To explain the second line, which reads as not accepting gifts such as gold, it means that if somebody offers you, who are the bodhisattva, gifts such as gold and coins and whatever, any kind of gifts, if you do not accept their gifts without any good reason, then you are committing the sixth fault. So if you have a good reason to not accept their gifts, then that is fine. But if you do not have any good reason to not accept their gifts, and you do not accept their gifts that they have offered you, then you are committing the sixth fault, and your bodhisattva vows have become a little damaged and weakened. To explain the third line of the 10th verse, not giving Dharma teachings to those who desire them. It means that if somebody wishes to receive Dharma teachings from you and you request the Dharma teachings, but you still do not care to help them, and you do not give the Dharma teachings which they so hope of receiving from you, which they wish to receive from you, if you fail to provide them with the Dharma teachings that they want, then you are committing the seventh fault, and your bodhisattva vows have become weakened. And the fourth line, which reads as disdaining those who have a distorted discipline, it means that if someone else's moral discipline has declined, has become damaged and has become weakened, and you abandon them due to that, you stop helping them once you know that their moral discipline or moral conduct has become polluted or damaged. And if you stop helping them, then that is the eighth fault. So it means that even if somebody else's moral discipline or moral conduct has become damaged, you should not stop helping them. If you stop helping them just because you know that their moral discipline has become damaged, then you are committing the eighth fault, the eighth minor fault of the 46 transgressions of a bodhisattva, and your bodhisattva vows become weakened due to that. To read the 11th verse now, not training in order to increase others' faith, performing only a few activities for the benefit of sentient beings, but if one has loving compassion, there is no non-virtue, voluntarily taking up wrong livelihood. So to speak of the first line of this 11th verse, not training in order to increase others' faith, what it means is that although oneself should be practicing the pratimoksha vows and also the bodhisattva vows in order to inspire others to practice the Dharma, if one does not practice, if one does not do so, it is the ninth fault. So as bodhisattvas, we always need to practice ourselves, and to always need to put an example for others to practice the Dharma. We always should try to inspire others to practice the Dharma. And the way we should inspire others is to practice the Bodhisattva vows, the Pratimoksha and the Bodhisattva vows oneself. And in that way, we can inspire others. But if we do not do so, if we do not practice the Pratimoksha vows and the Bodhisattva vows, and we fail to inspire others due to our own lack of practice, then it is the 9th fault of the 46 faults or transgressions. To explain the second line of the 11th verse, performing only a few activities for the benefit of sentient beings. It means that if you only perform small, or if you only perform a little benefit for sentient beings, similar to how the Shravakas or the practitioners of the lower vehicle or the Hinayana practitioners benefit sentient beings. If you practice, or if you just perform little benefit to sentient beings, just like the Shravakas do, even though you are capable of performing a great benefit for sentient beings, then that is the 10th fault. So it means that even if you are capable of benefiting a large number of sentient beings on a grand scale, even if you're capable of doing, benefiting sentient beings in so many ways, to so many beings, even if you are capable, but you still do not perform such great benefit, even when you are capable, and instead perform benefit, just a little benefit, like small benefit, similar to how the Shravakas benefit sentient beings, and that is the 10th fault of a Bodhisattva. And to explain the third line, but if one has loving compassion, there is no non-virtue. It means when you have great compassion and there's a special need in performing negative deeds of body and speech, if one still does not perform such negative deeds in special times of need, even when the Buddha has allowed it, it is the 11th fault. So what this means is that for the Bodhisattva vows, of course, you can never perform negative deeds of the mind. But if the special moment or time or need arises in which you can benefit sentient beings in doing so, the Buddha has allowed for bodhisattvas to commit negative deeds according to the body and the speech. So, for example, if the bodhisattva, if it is beneficial in all cases, generally killing is a negative deed of the body, lying is a negative deed of the speech. But if the need arises, if there's benefit of sentient beings, the bodhisattva needs to be skillful. So if the bodhisattva sees the need, the special need to perform negative deeds to the body and speech, if they see that by performing negative deeds to the body and speech, there will be benefit, then they can do that. The Buddha has allowed it. So, for example, there's the story of how Buddha Shakyamuni in a previous lifetime, as a captain, killed one of the evil sailors in the ship. So there's a story of how the Buddha Shakyamuni in the previous lifetime was the captain, and he was leading 500 merchants on a ship to acquire jewels from the ocean. And while they were out in the sea acquiring gems or jewels, one of the sailors, who happened to be very evil-minded, thought to himself that once all of the jewels have been accumulated by, or have been acquired by all of the 500 merchants, I shall kill them all off so I can take all of the jewels and keep them for myself. And the captain of the ship understood and found out of that evil sailor's intentions. So the captain thought to himself that what this evil sailor is planning to do is very evil. And especially all of the 500 merchants on this ship happen to be bodhisattvas. So if this sailor, if this evil merchant kills all of the 500 merchants, all of the other 500 merchants, not only will he be committing the negative deed of killing sentient beings, but he will also be committing the negative deed of killing 500 bodhisattvas. So due to that, that sailor will certainly fall to the lower realms, and particularly the hell realm and will suffer there for a long time. So instead, if I, the captain, kill that evil sailor, that evil merchant before he kills everyone else, then although I myself will be committing the negative deed of killing him, and I may go to hell, at least he won't be committing the negative deed of killing 500 bodhisattvas, and he won't have to go to hell, and he won't have to suffer. So the captain, having thought of that, killed the evil merchant before the evil merchant could kill the 500 other merchants. And due to that, although the captain himself had performed the action of killing, the act of killing, which is usually considered as a very negative deed, instead, because his motivation was good, even though the action on the appearance was negative, because the motivation was pure, it is said that the two accumulations of such as the accumulation of merit and wisdom of that captain quickly increased, and it got the captain much closer to attaining enlightenment. And later, that captain became Buddha Shakyamuni. So this is just an example. There are many such examples. So the Bodhisattva should not fail to commit negative deeds of body and speech if the special need arises. This isn't an excuse to commit negative deeds whenever you want, but if, just in case the special need arises, then you must not fail to do so. If you fail to do so, if there is benefit of committing the negative deed of body and speech, but you just do not do it because you say killing is bad and lying is bad, and you just stick to that, even though there may be benefit in doing it because of the special need, then you are committing the 11th fault, and your bodhisattva vows become weakened. To explain the fourth line of the 11th verse, voluntarily taking up wrong livelihood. So what that means is that if one abides in wrong livelihood, if one lives in the wrong way, if one lives with the wrong livelihood, then that is the 12th fault. So there are 5 different types of wrong livelihoods. The first wrong livelihood is to accept offerings from sponsors, such as food and money and so on, even when oneself does not keep the vows. So if oneself does keep the vows, if oneself has the bodhisattva vows, then it is fine to accept offerings from sponsors, and such as offerings of food and drinks and wealth and so on. But if oneself does not have the vows and still accepts such offerings from others, then that is the first type of wrong livelihood, and we should avoid this. If we do not avoid this, we commit the 12th fault. The second type of wrong livelihood is to take offerings such as food and drinks from the sponsor through pleasant talk. So we say pleasant things to the sponsor in order to obtain food and drink from them and offerings from them. So if one does such things, then that is wrong livelihood. It is the second type of wrong livelihood, and if we do that, then we commit the 12th fault. The third type of wrong livelihood is that even if oneself does not directly ask for it, if one still tries to get something from others by saying, if I could just have this, it would be so useful for me. It would be so useful for me. So you're not saying, please give this to me directly to others, but you're just sort of acting coy and trying to get them to give it to you by saying, if I could just have this, it would be so useful. It would come in so handy, and say such pleasant talk, and something like that to them. Then that is the third type of wrong livelihood. And if you have that, you commit the 12th fault as well. The fourth type of wrong livelihood is that if it's similar to the earlier wrong livelihood, it is even if one does not directly ask for it, if one still tries to get offerings from others by saying something like, in the past, someone else gave me something like this, and it really came out handy. It was really useful. So you say something like that. In the past, somebody gave me something just like this thing that you have, and it was really useful for them. So if you say something like that, you try to get them to give it to you, but you're not directly asking for it, but indirectly asking for it in such a way. And that is the fourth type of wrong livelihood. And if you have that, you commit the 12th fault. The fifth and the last type of wrong livelihood is if you give small gifts to others, gifts of small amounts, of small size, of small amounts to others, and you think, by giving this gift to others, I might even obtain something even bigger in return from them. So if you do such a thing like that, if you think like that and later actually something bigger in return, then you have the fifth wrong livelihood. And if you have that, you are committing the 12th fault also. So therefore, when a bodhisattva gives gifts to others, you should never look forward to the result of getting something in return. You're not giving them in order to get something in return. You will receive something in return. That's the law of karma. But you do not need to give in hopes of it, receiving it. You'll automatically receive it. If you focus on giving it to them, you do not need to focus on receiving in return. That is something you'll automatically receive, and you do not need to be worried about. But if you are thinking about that, more than their benefit, you're thinking about your own benefit of getting something back in return, and especially by giving something small to them and getting something bigger in return. That's the fifth type of wrong livelihood, and by that you are committing the 12th fault. So now to read the 12th verse, getting very agitated and so on from arrogance, intending to travel only in samsara, not abandoning bad reputation, not practicing the Dharma despite being afflicted. So what this means is that first of all, to explain the first line of the 12th verse, which means getting very agitated and so on from arrogance. So what this means is that if one causes one's own mind and also the minds of other beings to become distracted, and especially distracted from practicing the Dharma, then that is the 13th fault. So you should never, do things which will get you, yourself, or others distracted in the Dharma. You should try to avoid that. The second line reads as intending to travel only in samsara. So that means is that if you enjoy your stay in samsara, that is the 14th fault. It basically means you should not be attached to samsara. Of course, you should remain in samsara to benefit sentient beings, but you should not be attached to samsara by seeing samsara as being full of good qualities. Samsara's nature is full of faults, and that is how it is, and that is how you should recognize it to be. So you should not be attached to it. If you are attached to samsara and you enjoy your stay in samsara, then you are committing the 14th of the 46 minor transgressions of a bodhisattva. And of course, if you are attached to samsara, you will certainly not forget about the enlightenment. You cannot even attain liberation from suffering, because as Manjushri told Sachin Kumbhan Yingbo in Parting from the Four Attachments, if you are attached to samsara, you do not have renunciation. So if you are attached to samsara, you do not have renunciation. And if you do not have renunciation, you cannot be liberated from samsara. So therefore, as a bodhisattva, you should not be attached to samsara. If you are attached, if you are enjoying samsara, then that is the 14th fault. To explain the third line, which reads as not abandoning bad reputation, it means that if you do not avoid bad reputation for oneself, and also if you do not avoid bad gossip, useless and especially bad gossip, then that is the 15th fault. So the Bodhisattva should always make sure to avoid a bad, to avoid bad reputation, to always avoid obtaining a bad reputation for oneself. And should always avoid useless and bad gossip, as that is a very great distraction to the Dharma, as to one's Dharma practice. So therefore one should avoid gossip, bad gossip. But if you fail to avoid bad reputation and fail to avoid bad gossip, and to explain the fourth line, which reads as not practicing the Dharma despite being afflicted. So what that means is that even if one sees others' strong defilements, if one sees other sentient beings having strong defilements, such as having strong anger, strong attachment, strong ignorance, and even though we know that they have strong defilements, but oneself does nothing to help them. One makes no effort in diminishing their strong defilements. If one does nothing about it, if one doesn't care to help them to diminish their strong defilements, then that is the 16th fault. You are committing the 16th fault. So you need to help them. If you know that they have strong defilements, you need to try to help them and do something about it to help them in diminishing their faults. If you fail to do so, you commit the 16th fault. We now come to the 13th verse. Returning rebuke with rebuke, ignoring those who are angry, abandoning others who offer their heartfelt confessions, pursuing angry thoughts. So to explain the first line, which is returning rebuke with rebuke. And what that means is that if others scold you and you scold them back in return, if others hit you, or you could say beat you, and you hit or beat them out in return, and especially out of great anger, out of great rage, if you hit them and beat them and scold them due to being scolded in the first place, if you scold them in return out of great anger, if you beat them in return out of great anger, and also if others expose your faults and then you expose their faults in return. If you do all of these, then these are all the 17th fault. By doing all of these, you are committing the 17th fault. So therefore, when you are scolded, the Bodhisattva should practice patience and not return scolding with scolding. If you are beaten, by others, you as the Bodhisattva should practice, of course, compassion, but mainly patience, and not beat them in return to being beaten. If others expose your faults, whether it be to you directly, privately, or in front of a great crowd, or in front of the public, you should not expose their faults in return, but you should practice patience and not return exposing their faults to being exposed yourself. So if you do that, you are doing very well as a Bodhisattva. But if you fail to do so, then you are committing the 17th fault. And to explain the second line, ignoring those who are angry, it means that if someone becomes very angry towards you, what you as a Bodhisattva should really be doing is to understand their situation. And you should try to help, by understanding their situation, you should try to help cool them down. You should try to pacify them, you could say. And you should try to calm them down. But if you do not, that's what you should be doing. But if you do not do that, and instead you further fuel their anger and make them even more angry, then that is the 18th fault. So first of all, as Bodhisattvas, it's important to understand the situation of others. For example, when others become angry, you should try to understand their situation. So, for example, if somebody beats you with a stick, let's just put an example. If somebody beats you with a stick, who would you be angry at? Would you be angry at the stick, which actually gave you the pain? Or would you be angry at the person who was holding the stick? Nobody would be angry at the stick, but they would be angry at the person who was holding the stick, who has control over the stick. So likewise, when the Bodhisattva is facing somebody who is very, very angry towards them, the Bodhisattva should not become angry towards them. And they should not be angry towards that person who is angry towards you, but they should understand that the person who is angry is similar to the stick, and the anger in their mind is similar to the person who is holding the stick. The stick itself has no control. It is, the person who is holding the stick who has control of the stick. So likewise, it is the anger which has taken control over the actions of that person. That person itself who is being angry at you, they themselves have completely lost control over their actions. They are being controlled. They don't have control over their own actions when they are beating you. They have been taken, controlled over by the anger in their minds. So therefore, you should think that you should feel compassion towards them by understanding their situation, that it's not their fault, but they are controlled by their anger. So that is, it's a good example to think about whenever you are facing such angry people. And it is good to practice patience in such a way. But if you fail to do so, then you are committing the 18th fault. And to explain the third line, which is abandoning others who offer their heartfelt confessions, it means that if somebody confesses their mistakes to you, and they explain the reasons why, they explain the reasons for their actions in great detail. So they, for example, they committed some mistakes. They made some mistakes. They made some mistakes that really bothered you, that really disappointed you as the Bodhisattva. And now they come to you and they confess their mistakes. They try to apologize and they try to explain their situation. They try to explain the motive behind their actions. Why did they make the mistakes? And they try to explain the reasons behind their actions in great detail. Even if such a person comes to you and, who had earlier made mistakes and now confesses in such a way, if the Bodhisattva still does not forgive them and instead abandons them, especially out of great anger, then that is the 19th fault of the 46 transgressions of a Bodhisattva. To explain the fourth line, pursuing angry thoughts. This means if instead of abandoning the mind which holds anger or hatred towards others, if we instead keep the mind if instead we hold on to the mind which holds anger towards others, that is the 20th fault. So basically that means that it means that as the Bodhisattva, we should stay far away from anger, from an angry mind, from having an angry mind. We should never hold on to anger towards others. If we do hold on to anger towards others constantly, then that is the 20th fault, and it weakens our Bodhisattva vows. To read the 14th verse, gathering followers out of desire for service and reverence, not dispelling laziness, being inclined toward useless talk due to attachment, not pursuing meditative concentration. So to explain the first line of this, which is gathering followers out of desire for service and reverence, it means if oneself, the Bodhisattva, gathers disciples for the sake of being served and for the sake of being respected, then that is the 21st fault of the 46 faults. That is not the purpose of gathering disciples. You should be gathering disciples so that you can be placing them into the path of the Dharma, so they can be benefited from the Dharma, so they can attain enlightenment. You should not be gathering disciples, in hopes of being served by them, and in hopes of being respected. That is not the right motivation for gathering disciples. But if you do gather disciples with such wrong motivation, with hopes of being served and being respected, then you are committing the 21st fault. To explain the second line, which goes as not dispelling laziness, it means if oneself knows, if oneself understands that oneself has laziness and is distracted, if oneself knows that oneself is lazy and distracted, yet one does nothing about it, one does nothing to get rid of one's laziness, and one does nothing to get, one does nothing to focus, one does nothing to get rid of one's distractions, then that is the 22nd fault. So if you know that you are lazy and you know that you are distracted, but you still do nothing about it and just let it go and leave it as it is and continue to be lazy and continue to be distracted, then that is the 22nd fault. To explain the third line, which goes as being inclined toward useless talk due to attachment, what this means is if one does not abandon, or if one does not stay away from useless chatter with others due to one's enjoyment of gossip, then that is the 23rd fault. So if one does not, if one does not stay away from useless chatter because one really likes gossip, then that is the 23rd fault. So as a Bodhisattva, we should always avoid useless chatter. First of all, because useless chatter fuels, by hearing a lot of things from useless chatter, it will fuel your inner defilements, such as attachment towards, loved ones, anger towards those who you do not like, and it can also fuel ignorance by not understanding the correct situation and following blindly what other people say. And also, especially because chit-chat is such a distraction to the practice of Dharma and such a waste of time with no real, benefit to oneself or others in the end. One should avoid it. But if one does not avoid it and one really loves gossip and just cannot stay away from useless chatter because one is so attached to gossip, then that is the 23rd fault. The fourth line reads, not pursuing meditative concentration. So what that means is that if you fail to make effort in understanding the instructions on meditation, then that is the 24th fault. So as Bodhisattvas, we should always be diligent. We should always try to make the effort in understanding the instructions on meditation. The instructions, the teacher will give you instructions on how to meditate, and we should always try to make the effort to understand those instructions on meditation. But if we do not make any effort in understanding such instructions on meditation, then we are committing the 24th fault. To now read the 15th verse. Not abandoning the veils to meditative concentration, clinging to the experience of the pleasant taste of meditative concentration, abandoning the Shravakayana, striving in that despite having one's own methods. So to explain the first line, not abandoning the veils to meditative concentration, it means if one does not abandon distraction and dullness which are the two obscurations to the meditative concentration, then that is the 25th fault. So when we meditate, there are two main obscurations, two main obstacles, which will disturb our meditation, which will make our meditation an unsuccessful meditation. So there are two faults. They are distraction and dullness. So if we have distraction, then we are not focused. If we are not focused, then our meditation does not work well. If we have dullness, if we are, very tired, if our mind is not clear, if our mind is very dull, then that also is an obstacle to having a successful meditation, to successfully meditate, because in order to meditate, you need to have a clear mind, and dullness is the exact opposite of a clear mind. So we need, as bodhisattvas, we need to meditate. And in order to meditate, we need to, stay away. Because we need to meditate, we need to make sure that we do not have these two obscurations, distraction and dullness. But if we do nothing about it, if we have distraction and dullness, and we do nothing about it, if we make no effort in getting rid of it, and we continue to keep it, then that is the 25th fault. And to explain the second line, clinging to the experience of the pleasant taste of meditative concentration. So what this means is that if we attach to the pleasure which arises from meditative concentration, or you could say meditation, then that is the 26th fault. When we meditate, there will certainly be pleasure. We will certainly attain some kind of peace or happiness. And although we will attain such peace and happiness from our meditation, we should never be attached to such peace and meditation, as if we do become attached, we are falling into a great trap. So therefore, one should not fall into that great trap of being attached to the pleasure which arises from meditative concentration. If one does become attached, one commits the 26th fault of the 46 transgressions. To explain the third line, abandoning the Shravakayana, it means if you, the Bodhisattva, abandon the work of hearing, of performing hearing, contemplating and meditating on the scriptures of the Hinayana, or you could say the lesser vehicle, without any good reason, then that is the 27th fault. So generally, of course, what we should be following and practicing and studying, we should be hearing, contemplating and meditating on the Mahayana scriptures. But and we do not really need to necessarily focus on hearing, contemplation and meditation on the Hinayana scriptures. But if we do not if we do not hear, contemplate and meditate on the Hinayana scriptures due to if we do not contemplate and hear, contemplate and meditate without any good reason, then that is a fault. If we have a good reason to not hear, contemplate and meditate on the Hinayana scriptures, that is fine. But if we have no good reason at all and still do not hear, meditate and contemplate on the Hinayana scriptures, then that is a fault. And that is the 27th fault. The fourth line reads, striving in that despite having one's own methods. It means that, to explain that, it means that if you enjoy and you become too diligent, if you are diligent and enjoy studying the scriptures of the lesser vehicle, the Theravada, you could say the Hinayana vehicle, too much, and abandon your own Mahayana scriptures, the greater vehicle scriptures, you abandon the study of your own greater scriptures, then that is the 28th fault. So what that means is that As I mentioned earlier, our focus should be the study, hearing, contemplation, and meditation on the Mahayana scriptures. We can study, contemplate, and meditation on the lesser vehicle, but that is not our focus. That is not our priority. If we mix up our priority and we consider ourselves as the Bodhisattva, but enjoy studying, hearing, contemplating, meditating on the scriptures of the lesser vehicle even more than studying, hearing, contemplating, meditating on the scriptures of the Mahayana vehicle, then that is a fault. That is a fault, and it will weaken your Bodhisattva vows. It is the 28th fault of the 46 faults. Now to read the 16th verse. Striving in what one should not, the non-Buddhist scriptures, preferring those despite striving in the Buddha Dharma, abandoning the Mahayana, praising oneself and criticizing others. So to explain the first line, striving in what one should not, the non-Buddhist scriptures. It means that if one enjoys hearing, contemplating, and meditating on non-Buddhist scriptures, which one should not really even be enjoying reading, that is the 29th fault. So of course, it is fine to read the non-Buddhist scriptures, but as a Bodhisattva, you should not really enjoy reading. It's fine to read. It's fine to understand, the views and the beliefs of other religions and read the scriptures, but you should never enjoy reading. It doesn't mean you should, harbor great hatred towards it, but you should not, find great joy or, in such reading. That is the point. If you do enjoy such reading, then that is the 29th fault. To explain the second line, preferring those despite striving in the Buddha Dharma. So that means that even if one does happen to need to study the non-Buddhist scriptures, even if one happens to need to study the non-Buddhist scriptures, or you could say even if the need arises in which where one should be studying the non-Buddhist scriptures, in order to benefit other beings, one should not feel devotion or pay homage towards the non-Buddhist gods and teachers. However, if one does feel devotion and pay homage to non-Buddhist gods, then that is the 30th. That is the 30th. That is the 30th of the 46 faults. So here it shows with this line, it shows that as a Bodhisattva, the need might arise or the situation might arise where you will have to study the non-Buddhist scriptures. But the purpose, of course, is not to practice it. It's to understand their views so that you can understand what is the right view and what is the correct and what is the incorrect view, and you can guide others in showing them what is the correct view and what is the incorrect view. That is the purpose of studying non-Buddhist scriptures. It is to know, it is to understand what is right and what is wrong. It is not to accept those teachings or scriptures. But if the Bodhisattva studies the non-Buddhist scriptures and starts to feel devotion towards, their gods, their teachers, and their divinities and so on, even when one should not be doing so, then that is the 30th fault. To explain the third line, which goes as abandoning the Mahayana, it means if oneself, the Bodhisattva, does not believe in the inconceivable blessings, in the inconceivable power of the great vehicle, and thus abandons it, that is the 31st fault. So, in the Mahayana, there's so much miracles mentioned in the sutras, in shastras, and so on. The sutras and the scriptures and so on. And the Buddhas display many great miracles. For example, in the Hinayana, the Buddha sort of said, told his disciples that it is not necessary to show much great power or spiritual, power or miracles. And he himself did not often show miracles, except for, special occasions. But in the Mahayana, miracles are an important part. It plays an important part. And we need to believe it. As bodhisattvas, we need to believe the miracles that are mentioned, the power of, and the miracles that are mentioned in the Mahayana scriptures. So, but if we do not believe in it, even as bodhisattvas, we still continue to not believe in such great power and miracles of the Mahayana and the inconceivable blessings as well, then that is the 31st fault of the 46 faults. The fourth line reads as praising oneself and criticizing others. It means if one praises oneself and criticizes others out of anger, that is the 32nd fault. So earlier we did also mention one of the earlier faults above, we did mention something similar to this where one praises oneself and criticizes others. And that was considered as a fault, but that was sort of like a more of attachment to oneself, I believe. And this one, the one mentioned here, is praising oneself and crazy. Yeah, the earlier one was out of great pride, praising oneself and criticizing others out of great pride. The one here, it looks similar, but it is different. It is praising oneself and criticizing others out of great anger. So that is the 32nd fault. We now come to the 17th verse. Not going for Dharma teachings, criticizing the teacher for merely relying on words, not helping someone in need, abandoning care for the ill. So to explain the first line, which is not going for Dharma teachings, it means that if you, the Bodhisattva, do not make the effort and do not go into the presence of a Dharma teacher in order to listen to Dharma teachings, that is the 33rd fault. So it's very important, some people might wish or think that by reading Dharma books alone and not relying on a teacher, it is sufficient, but that is not the case. Especially for bodhisattvas, it's necessary to rely on the teacher, so you get provided with the correct information, with the correct methods, with the correct instructions on how to practice the Dharma correctly. So therefore, it's very important to meet the teacher. And of course, the teacher in this case would also probably be the same teacher as mentioned earlier, the teacher who has the Bodhisattva Vows of the Mind-Only School, who is learned in the Mahayana scriptures, and who is able to bestow the Bodhisattva Vows according to the Mind-Only School, and so on. And to explain the second line, criticizing the teacher for merely relying on words. To explain this, it means if one criticizes such a teacher, such a Dharma teacher who teaches the Dharma and disrespects what the teacher shows, that is the 34th fault. So it means basically you should never criticize the teacher and disrespect their teachings. If you do, that is the fault. And the third line reads, not helping someone in need. And that means if one is capable of recounseling two people, yet one does not help to bring about peace, that is the 35th fault. So if two people are in an argument and not getting along with each other, and you do nothing about it, you make no effort in helping to recounsel them and bring about peace, then that is the 35th fault. The fourth line reads, abandoning care for the ill. So what that means is that if one abandons the responsibility of looking after the sick, that is the 36th fault. So as a bodhisattva, you should never forget the needs of sentient beings. And especially if they are sick, you should help them. If you fail to do so, that is the 36th fault. So we are running out of time, so I'll just try to quickly finish it in about 15 minutes time. The 18th verse, not dispelling suffering, not correcting the careless ones with reasoning, not repaying good deeds, not alleviating others' grief. So the first line means, if you do not search for ways to dispel the suffering of other sentient beings, that is the 37th fault. The second line means, if one does not explain the reasons why one must not be carefree to the careless, that is the 38th fault. So many sentient beings might be careless. They might be careless in following the law of karma. But, and so you should teach them why it is not correct to be careless and why they must be more careful. If you fail to do so, that is the 38th fault. The third line means, if one does not repay the kindness of those who are kind to oneself, that is the 39th fault. So that is easy to understand. And the fourth line means, if one does not help to alleviate others' sufferings, such as the sufferings of a mother who has lost her child, if one does not console her and does nothing to help other sentient beings who are suffering, then that is the 40th fault. We now come to the 19th verse. Not giving to those who want wealth, not working for the welfare of followers, not acting in harmony with the mindset of others, not praising others' qualities. So the first line means that if you do not give wealth and Dharma teachings to others due to harboring great anger towards them, that is the 41st fault. The second line means, if one does not work for the welfare of those in one's circle, those people surrounding you, by giving them wealth and Dharma teachings, then that is the 42nd fault. We need to help them by giving Dharma teachings and wealth. If one fails to do so, that is the fault. The third line means, if one does not perform work which is in harmony with the minds of others due to great anger, that is the 43rd fault. So when we help sentient beings, we should help them in a way that is in harmony with their minds. But if we fail to do so due to great anger, that is the fault. The fourth line means, if one does not extol the good qualities of others who possess it, that is the 44th fault. So if there's somebody who possesses good qualities, we must always make sure to praise their good qualities. If we fail to do so, that is a fault. Now for the last verse, the 20th verse, not taming others in accord with the situation, not using magical powers to threaten and so forth. There are no downfalls for a virtuous mind and in living and loving. So the first line means, if others have committed wrongdoings, one must tame them to appropriate methods, to appropriate means, which are in accord with their wrongdoings. If one fails to do so, that is the 45th fault. The second line means, if one does not frighten or scare those who create obstacles to the Dharma, and if one does not frighten those who harm sentient beings through magical feats, even when one has magic, that is the 46th fault. So if the Bodhisattva oneself possesses magic, if one can show magic, and one does not show magic by frightening those who create obstacles to the Dharma and harm sentient beings, then that is a fault. So one must show magic in such situations if one does have magic. So with this, we have spoken of the last 46th fault. Now to explain the last two lines together, it means, it has been told by Lord Buddha, there are no faults in performing negative actions of the body and the voice for those bodhisattvas who have a compassionate and loving heart towards all sentient beings encompassing space, and who are joyful in performing the needs of sentient beings if the special need arises. So this is the same as what I mentioned earlier. The Buddha gave permission for bodhisattvas to perform negative deeds of body and speech if this special need arises. And this is sort of like a reminder. So with this, we have completed the teaching to be in the colophon. The 20 verses on the Bodhisattva vows composed by Chandra Gomin are completed. Thank you.